I never imagined silence could be louder than laughter until that dinner table went still, and every eye turned away from me. At dinner, my son leaned back in his chair, smirked, and asked how it felt to be useless. His wife laughed like it was a joke everyone had agreed on beforehand. I remember the weight of the fork in my hand, the sound of my own breathing, and the way no one spoke up for me, not my family, not the people I had protected for years. In that moment, something broke quietly inside me. I did not shout. I didn't defend myself. I stayed calm because I understood something they did not yet realize. Humiliation is only powerful if you react, and I was done giving them that power. What they saw as weakness was me choosing my moment, because that dinner was not the end. It was the beginning of a decision that would change everything they depended on. Over the next 48 hours, I made moves. No one noticed. Calls were made, doors were closed, and truths were prepared to surface. And while they slept comfortably, believing they had finally put me in my place, the ground beneath them was already shifting. This story is not just about betrayal. It is about patience, restraint, and the dangerous mistake of underestimating the quiet man at the table. If you have ever been disrespected by your own family, ignored when you deserved gratitude, or laughed at when you gave everything, then stay with me, because what happened next shocked everyone involved. By the time they realized what I had done, the laughter was gone, replaced by panic, desperation, and voices begging me to stop. And the satisfaction came not from revenge alone, but from watching them finally understand exactly who I was and what they had just lost. My name is Henry Caldwell. I'm 68 years old, a retired civil engineer who spent 40 years designing bridges and highways across the Northeast. I built my career on precision, patience, and the belief that solid foundations could hold anything together. I was wrong. I carried Evelyn's apple pie up the driveway like a man carrying his own heart in a dish. She had perfected that recipe over 4 decades of Sunday dinners, cinnamon and brown sugar folded into a lattice crust brushed with butter. I hadn't baked it since she passed 2 years ago. But that morning, I woke with Daniel on my mind, remembering how he used to sneak into the kitchen as a boy and steal warm slices before dinner was served. I thought maybe a taste of his mother's cooking might remind him of who we used to be. So I pulled out her recipe card, still spotted with flour stains, from hands that would never touch it again, and I baked. The November air bit at my knuckles as I rang the doorbell. Through the frosted glass, I could see the chandelier Vanessa had installed last spring, crystal and chrome, the kind of thing that costs more than my first car. The door swung open, and there she stood, my daughter-in-law, dressed like she was expecting a photographer instead of her husband's father. She said my name the way you might say traffic or Monday. I held up the pie and told her it was Evelyn's recipe. Something flickered across her face, annoyance or something colder, and she took the dish without looking at it. She set it on the hallway table beside a vase of artificial flowers and told me Daniel was in the living room. The pie sat there untouched for the rest of the evening. I tried not to look at it. Daniel stood when I entered, but his hug felt rehearsed. My son, 41 years old and successful by every measure Vanessa would count, could not meet my eyes. He had always been like his mother, gentle and thoughtful, the kind of boy who caught spiders in cups and released them outside. But somewhere in the past decade, that gentleness had curdled into silence. Dinner was served at precisely 6 o'clock. The table was beautiful white linens and polished silver and candles that smelled like sandalwood. But sitting there felt like dining in a museum, beautiful and cold. Vanessa controlled every conversation. She interrupted me mid-sentence when I tried to share a story about a project I had worked on years ago. She corrected my opinions on politics with a pitying smile. When I mentioned driving to the hardware store, she tilted her head and suggested that perhaps I should not be driving at night anymore, that reflexes slow down at my age. Daniel said nothing. He pushed food around his plate like a child, hoping not to be called on. When the dishes piled up, Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Too bad Gloria is not here anymore," she said. She actually knew how to keep a house running. The name landed in my chest like a stone. Gloria, the housekeeper, who had quit 3 years ago. I remembered the day she left, how Evelyn had cried real sobs that shook her shoulders. I had found her clutching a photograph, and when I asked what was wrong, she only said she was losing everyone. I never understood why losing a housekeeper hurt her so much. After dinner, I gathered my coat. The pie still sat on the hallway table, the foil covering undisturbed. Vanessa walked me to the door not from courtesy, but to make sure I left. She stopped me with a hand on my arm. Her voice dropped to that register she used when she wanted to sound thoughtful. "Henry," she said, "can I ask you something honestly?" I paused with one arm in my coat sleeve and told her to go ahead. She tilted her head, studying me the way someone examines an item at a garage sale, assessing its worth and finding it lacking. A small smile played at her lips. "How does it feel," she asked, "to be completely useless?" The words landed like a slap. Daniel appeared in the hallway behind her, close enough to have heard. His face went pale. His mouth opened, then closed. He said nothing. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked past her at my son standing in the shadows of his own home, unable to defend his father or himself. "Good night, Vanessa," I said quietly. I walked to my truck, started the engine, and sat there in the dark for a long time. The question hung in the air like smoke. I did not answer her. But for the first time in 2 years, something shifted behind my eyes, something that looked almost like a decision. The drive home took 20 minutes but felt like hours. Every stoplight gave me time to replay Vanessa's words, to see Daniel's pale face frozen in the hallway, to feel the weight of silence where my son's voice should have been. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, the question had burrowed into my chest like a splinter I could not reach. The house was dark when I opened the door. I'd forgotten to leave a light on, something Evelyn used to do whenever I came home late from work. She said an empty house should never look empty from the outside. "It gives loneliness too much power," she would say. Now the loneliness met me at the threshold and followed me inside. I set the pie dish on the kitchen counter. Vanessa had handed it back to me as I left the foil still perfectly sealed, the lattice crust untouched beneath it. I peeled back the covering and looked at what I had made. It looked exactly like Evelyn's. It smelled exactly like hers, but no one had wanted it. I washed the dish slowly, the warm water running over my hands, and I remembered how Evelyn always saved me the corner piece. She said the edges held the most flavor, where the crust met the filling and caramelized into something richer than either part alone. I had not eaten a corner piece in 2 years. When the dish was clean, I dried it and set it in the cabinet where it belonged. Then I walked to the living room and stood in front of her photograph on the mantel. She smiled at me from behind the glass, frozen in a moment from our 40th anniversary, her silver hair catching the light, her eyes holding that quiet knowing she always carried. "They do not see me anymore, Evie," I said aloud. Maybe they never did. The photograph did not answer. It never did. But sometimes in the silence that followed, I imagined I could hear her voice telling me to stop feeling sorry for myself and start doing something about it. I had been avoiding her desk for 2 years. It sat in the corner of our bedroom, a small oak writing table she had inherited from her mother, covered now with a thin layer of dust I could not bring myself to wipe away. Touching her things felt like trespassing on sacred ground. But that night something pulled me toward it. Maybe it was Vanessa's question. Maybe it was the need to remember who I had been before I became useless. I opened the top drawer and found the usual things. Old stamps, a broken watch she had meant to repair, receipts for items I no longer remembered buying. I moved through the papers carefully, afraid to disturb the order she had left behind. And then, tucked behind a stack of envelopes, I found a photograph I had never seen before. Gloria and Evelyn sat together on what looked like a park bench, shoulders touching, laughing at something beyond the camera's view. They looked like old friends, not like an employer and her housekeeper. I turned the photograph over and felt my breath catch. In Evelyn's handwriting, faded but unmistakable, were the words, "My most loyal friend, 2019. I stared at those words for a long time. Gloria had worked for us for 8 years before she quit, or so, Vanessa had told us. She had been efficient and quiet, someone who moved through our home without demanding attention. But this photograph showed something different. This showed intimacy, trust. The kind of bond that does not form between people who only share a paycheck. Why had Evelyn never told me? What had Gloria meant to her that she would write such words? I set the photograph aside and let my mind wander to other things I had noticed but never questioned. Daniel's strange habit, for instance. He never parked in the driveway anymore. Every visit he left his car on the street facing outward, like a man who needed to know he could leave quickly. Last month I had asked him to pull into the garage so I could show him a leak in the roof. His face had gone pale, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "I do not like driving in tight spaces anymore, Dad," he had said. Since when? He had been driving since he was 16. He had never mentioned any fear before. I sat on the edge of the bed, the photograph still in my hand, and I looked at Evelyn's bedside drawer. I had not opened it since the morning she died. Her reading glasses were still inside, along with the lavender hand cream she used every night, and whatever else she had kept close to her in those final months. Opening it felt like disturbing her rest, but Vanessa's voice echoed in my skull. Useless. Completely useless. I needed to remember who I was. I needed to remember who Evelyn believed I could be. I pulled open the drawer. Inside, beneath the glasses and the cream and a worn paperback novel, my fingers closed around a cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front in Evelyn's unmistakable script, the letters careful and deliberate. The paper was old but preserved with intention, as if she had placed it there knowing I would find it someday. Whatever was inside, she had meant for me to discover it, but only when I was ready. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it. The paper felt fragile beneath my fingers, worn soft at the edges from age, yet preserved with deliberate care. Evelyn had placed this here knowing I would find it someday. She had trusted me to reach for it when the moment was right. I was not certain this was that moment, but Vanessa's question still burned in my chest, and I needed something to hold on to besides grief. I slid my thumb beneath the seal and opened it carefully. Inside were 2 items. The first was a business card, crisp white with elegant black lettering. Harvey Brennan, attorney at law, followed by an address in Hartford and a phone number for his firm. I knew Harvey. He had handled our estate planning years ago, a quiet man with steady hands and a reputation for discretion. But beneath the printed number in Evelyn's handwriting was a second phone number. This one I did not recognize. No name accompanied it, no explanation. Just 10 digits written in her careful script as if she had added it specifically for me to find. The second item was a letter folded twice and dated 6 months before she died. My dearest Henry, it began. If you are reading this, I probably did not get to say everything I wanted. I know you. You are patient. You are kind. You forgive too easily. These are the things I have always loved about you, but they are also the things that worry me most. Kindness without boundaries is just an invitation to be used. I have watched you give and give and give, and I have watched others take without gratitude or shame. I could not stop it while I was alive. But I have left you something. Not money, not revenge, a choice. Call the number I have written on this card only when you have no other options left. Trust me, Henry. Trust what I have built for you, and know this, I've written other letters. This is just the first. The letter was signed with her name and a small drawing of a heart, the same way she had signed every birthday card and anniversary note for 43 years. I read it 3 times. Each reading raised more questions than it answered. What choice had she left me? What other letters existed, and where had she hidden them? The handwritten number haunted me most of all. It was not Harvey's office. It was not any number I recognized from our life together. Someone else. Someone Evelyn had trusted enough to include in whatever plan she had constructed in the months before her death. I thought of the photograph I had found in her desk, Gloria and Evelyn laughing together like sisters. My most loyal friend, the inscription had said. I had dismissed Gloria as someone who simply worked for us, a pleasant presence who kept the house running and then moved on. But Evelyn's words suggested something deeper. A bond I had never noticed, a trust I had never understood. Had Evelyn given Gloria this number? Had she been part of whatever my wife had planned? I sat with these questions until the room grew dark around me. The letter lay open on my lap, her handwriting illuminated by the last gray light from the window. I wanted to call the number immediately. I wanted answers, explanations, something to fill the hollow space her death had carved inside me. But Evelyn had been specific. Only when you have no other options left. I was not there yet. I was hurt and tired and angry at my daughter-in-law, but I still had options. I could still speak to Daniel. I could still try to rebuild what had crumbled. I put the business card in my wallet, tucked behind my driver's license, where I would see it every time I reached for identification. The letter I folded carefully and returned to the drawer, placing it beneath her reading glasses where it had waited for me all along. I was not ready to use whatever weapon she had left me. But for the first time in 2 years, I felt something other than grief. I felt curious. I felt the faint stirring of something that might have been hope. 3 days passed. I tried calling Daniel twice, but both times Vanessa answered and told me he was busy with work. I drove past their house, once saw the lights on inside, saw shadows moving behind the curtains, and kept driving. I told myself to be patient. I told myself things would improve. Then Vanessa called. She did not ask how I was or whether I had recovered from Sunday's dinner. She spoke in the clipped tone of someone delivering instructions to an employee. They were selling the family house, she said. My house. The one Evelyn and I had built together 40 years ago, where we raised Daniel, where she took her last breath in the bedroom we had shared for 4 decades. They needed the equity for Daniel's new business venture. She told me to start packing. She told me I could find a nice apartment closer to town. She told me this was for the best. She did not ask my permission. She did not pause for my response. She simply informed me of what would happen and then hung up. That night I sat alone in the kitchen where Evelyn had taught me to make her apple pie. I took out my wallet and removed the business card. The handwritten numbers stared back at me, 10 digits that held answers I could not yet imagine. I picked up the phone. I had no other options left. The phone rang twice before someone answered. I had expected a recording perhaps, or the confused voice of a stranger wondering who was calling at this hour. What I did not expect was warmth. What I did not expect was recognition. Mr. Caldwell, the woman said, I have been waiting for this call. My breath caught in my throat. The voice was familiar in a way that made my chest tighten, like hearing a song from decades ago and suddenly remembering every word. I knew this voice. I had heard it in my kitchen, in my hallways, in the background of 100 ordinary days I had taken for granted. Gloria, I said. She laughed softly, that same gentle laugh I remembered from years of family dinners, when she would set dishes on the table and exchange quiet jokes with Evelyn while I pretended not to notice. Mrs. Evelyn said you would call eventually. Gloria continued. She just did not know when. I sat down heavily in the kitchen chair. The phone pressed hard against my ear. My mind raced through questions I did not know how to ask. Gloria had quit 3 years ago. Vanessa had told us she was moving to be closer to her grandchildren in another state. We had sent her off with a card and a small bonus, and I had thought nothing more of it. But Evelyn had cried that day. Evelyn had clutched a photograph and wept like she was losing a sister. You did not quit, I said. It was not a question. No, Mr. Caldwell, I did not. Gloria's voice remained calm as she explained what I had never suspected. 5 years ago, when Evelyn first received her diagnosis, she began noticing things she had overlooked before. Small things at first. The way Vanessa controlled conversations. The way she spoke over Daniel until he stopped speaking at all. The way she made financial decisions without consulting anyone, moving money and signing papers as if the family belonged to her. Evelyn watched her daughter-in-law isolate her son piece by piece, and she watched me give ground without realizing I was losing territory I could never reclaim. She came to me one evening, Gloria said. She asked if I would be willing to do something difficult, something that required patience and secrecy and loyalty. She said she needed someone she could trust completely, and she asked if I was that person. Evelyn had staged Gloria's departure 3 years ago. She created the story about grandchildren in another state, gave Gloria a generous severance that was actually a salary continuation, and sent her away before anyone could question the arrangement. But Gloria never truly left. She moved to an apartment 20 minutes outside of town. She continued to watch. She continued to document. She continued to wait for the day I would need what she had gathered. Mr. Caldwell, Gloria said, her voice steady and serious. I have 5 years of documentation. Photographs of documents Vanessa signed without authorization, videos without audio. Because Mrs. Evelyn was very careful about what would be legal and what would not. A daily journal of everything I witnessed, every conversation I overheard, every decision that was made behind your back. Mrs. Evelyn did not want to leave you defenseless. She wanted you to have a choice, but only when you were ready to make it. I could not speak. I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the shadows of a house they wanted to sell. Listening to a woman I had barely noticed for 8 years tell me that my wife had spent her final years building a fortress around me, even dying, even knowing she could not protect me forever. She had found someone loyal. She had planned for every possibility. She had waited across death itself for me to choose. Why did she not tell me, I finally asked? Why keep this secret? Gloria's pause held a kindness I did not deserve. Because she knew you, Mr. Caldwell. She knew you would try to fix things yourself. She knew you would forgive Vanessa and Daniel and everyone who hurt you, because that is who you are. She loved that about you, but she also knew it would destroy you if no one stood in the gap. So she asked me to stand there, and I have been standing there ever since. Tears slid down my face. I did not wipe them away. I let them fall onto the table where Evelyn and I had shared 40 years of breakfasts, where she had squeezed my hand on difficult mornings and told me everything would work out. She had been protecting me even then. She had never stopped. "There is more," Caldwell Gloria said quietly. "Mrs. Evelyn left instructions for me to give you something else, but only in person. Can you come to me tomorrow?" I gripped the phone tighter. What else did she leave? Gloria's pause lasted 3 heartbeats. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of secrets kept too long. "Letters, Mr. Caldwell. Letters for everyone, including one for Vanessa." The apartment complex sat on a quiet road 15 minutes outside of town, the kind of place people passed without noticing. I found Gloria's unit on the 2nd floor, a modest door with a small wreath of dried flowers hanging beside the number. She opened it before I could knock, as if she had been watching for my arrival from the window. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, stepping aside to let me enter. "Thank you for coming." She looked the same as I remembered, perhaps a few more lines around her eyes. Her gray hair pulled back in the same neat bun she had always worn. She moved with the same quiet dignity that had made her presence in our home feel natural, like she belonged to the rhythm of our lives. She offered me tea, and I accepted because I did not know what else to do with my hands. The living room had been transformed into something I did not expect. A folding table stood against one wall, covered with labeled folders arranged in chronological order. A laptop sat open on a small desk, its screen displaying a grid of organized files. USB drives lined up in a row beside it, each one marked with a year. This was not the home of a retired housekeeper. This was an archive, a command center. 5 years of patient, invisible work condensed into a single room. Gloria handed me a cup of tea and gestured toward the table. "Please," she said, "sit down. There is much to show you." She began with the photographs. The first set showed documents I recognized, bank statements and property records bearing my signature. Except the signatures were not mine. Gloria pointed to subtle differences in the letter formations, inconsistencies a casual observer would miss, but that became obvious when compared side by side. Vanessa had been forging my name for years, authorizing transfers and decisions I had never approved. I felt sick looking at them, not from the betrayal itself, but from how easily I had been fooled. The videos came next. Gloria had been careful, she explained, to record only images without audio. Evelyn had consulted with Harvey Brennan on what would be admissible and what would cross legal lines. The footage showed Vanessa in moments she believed were private. In one clip, she stood in Daniel's home office pointing her finger at him while he sat motionless in his chair. I could not hear her words, but the violence in her posture needed no translation. In another, she rifled through papers in what looked like my own study, photographing documents with her phone before replacing them exactly as she had found them. Watching felt like peering through a window into a house I thought I knew, and discovering it had been burning from the inside all along. The journal was the hardest. Gloria had kept a daily record of everything she witnessed, written in neat handwriting that filled notebook after notebook. She opened one to an entry from 3 years ago and handed it to me. The words blurred as I read them. Today, V told H he was lucky they let him stay in his own house. H said nothing. E would have been heartbroken. I remembered that day. I remembered Vanessa's offhand comment and how I had laughed it off, telling myself she was joking. I remembered choosing silence because fighting seemed like too much effort. Page after page documented small cruelties I had absorbed without acknowledgement, insults I had swallowed, decisions made without my input, a slow erosion of dignity so gradual I had not noticed I was disappearing. Why, I asked, my voice cracking. Why did she do all this? Gloria sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap. She told me something I will never forget, Mr. Caldwell. She said, "Gloria Henry is the kindest man I have ever known. That is his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. When I am gone, they will use that kindness against him. I need you to be my eyes when I cannot watch anymore." She paused, letting the words settle. "She loved you more than you will ever understand. She could not bear the thought of leaving you defenseless." I broke down then. The tears came without warning, rising from somewhere deeper than grief, deeper than anger. For 2 years I had believed I was alone. For 2 years I had thought Evelyn's death had left me abandoned in a world that no longer had a place for me. But she had never left. She had built a wall around me that I could not see, stationed a guardian I had overlooked, and waited with infinite patience for me to find my way to the truth. Gloria let me cry without interruption. When I finally gathered myself, she reached into a drawer and withdrew a small USB drive. "This is your weapon, Mr. Caldwell," she said, placing it in my palm. "But Mrs. Evelyn did not want you to use it for revenge. She wanted you to use it for freedom, yours and Daniel's." I looked up sharply at the mention of my son's name. Gloria's expression softened with something like pity. She hesitated, as if weighing whether I was ready for what came next. "There is something you do not know about your son, Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly. "Something that explains everything, why he is silent, why he is afraid, why he lets her control him without fighting back. Mrs. Evelyn discovered it 2 years before she died." She paused, and the silence stretched between us like a held breath, and it broke her heart. Gloria did not tell me what Evelyn had discovered about Daniel. She said it was not her secret to share, that when the time was right, I would learn the truth from the only person who could truly explain it. I left her apartment with the USB drive in my pocket, and more questions than answers, but also with something I had not felt in years: purpose, direction, the sense that I was no longer drifting through the wreckage of my life, but finally swimming toward shore. Before I left, Gloria taught me a few things. Basic surveillance techniques, she called them, though the phrase felt strange coming from a woman who had spent 8 years serving dinner in my home. She showed me how to park at a distance that allowed observation without detection. She explained the importance of patience, of watching, without acting, of gathering information before making decisions. "Mrs. Evelyn wanted you to understand everything before you moved," she said. "Knowledge is only power if you know how to use it." 2 days later, I put her lessons into practice. I parked my truck on a side street 3 houses down from Daniel and Vanessa's home, positioned so I could see their living room window without being noticed. The binoculars Gloria had given me felt awkward in my hands, but I adjusted them until the image sharpened. Through the glass, I watched my daughter-in-law conduct her kingdom. Vanessa sat at the dining room table with a stack of papers spread before her. Daniel stood nearby, his posture rigid, his arms crossed over his chest. Even from this distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders. She was explaining something to him, pointing at documents, her movements sharp and efficient. Then she picked up a pen and signed. I recognized the gesture. I had seen it before in the photographs Gloria showed me. Vanessa was signing papers that required my authorization using a power of attorney I did not remember granting. She was transferring pieces of my life into her control, one signature at a time. Daniel said something. I could not hear the words, but I saw his jaw tighten, saw him take a step forward, as if to object. Vanessa looked up at him with an expression I recognized from Sunday dinner, that mixture of pity and contempt that seemed permanently etched into her features when she addressed anyone she considered beneath her. She spoke, and whatever she said made Daniel stop mid-motion. His face went pale. His hands dropped to his sides. He stood there frozen, as if she had pressed a button that shut down every impulse to resist. She returned to her papers without another glance at him, and he retreated to the corner of the room like a scolded child. I lowered the binoculars and wrote in the small notebook Gloria had given me. She mentioned something. He stopped fighting. "Find out what she has on him." The words felt clinical, detached from the reality of watching my own son surrender to his wife's control. But I understood now that emotion would not save him. Only information could do that. A few minutes later, Vanessa's phone rang. I raised the binoculars again and watched her glance at the screen. Something changed in her face. For a split second, her mask cracked, and I saw something I had never seen in her before. Fear, genuine, unguarded fear. She rejected the call quickly, as if the phone itself had burned her hand. Daniel asked her something. Who was that, probably, or some similar question any husband might pose. Vanessa's answer was brief. I could not read her lips, but her body language spoke clearly enough. She dismissed the question with a wave of her hand, turned away from him, and began pacing the room. Back and forth, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something in. I wrote in my notebook again. Phone call upset her. Someone she does not want to talk to. Ohio. I remembered Gloria mentioning that Vanessa never spoke about her family back east, that Evelyn had once tried to ask about her childhood and received only cold silence in response. Whatever that phone call represented, it had rattled her more than any confrontation with Daniel ever had. I watched her pace for another 10 minutes, studying her movements with new eyes. Gloria had been right. When Vanessa controlled others, her expression did not show triumph or satisfaction. It showed fear. She was not a predator enjoying the hunt. She was a cornered animal, lashing out at anything that came close. Understanding this did not make me forgive her, but it made me wonder what had happened to turn a woman into someone who saw control as the only form of safety. I drove home as the sun began to set, the USB drive heavy in my pocket, the notebook filled with observations I would review later. The house was dark when I arrived, and I didn't bother turning on lights. I sat in the kitchen with my laptop open, checking emails out of habit more than necessity. The message appeared near the top of my inbox, new listing alert. The subject line read, "Property matching your saved search." I clicked it without thinking, assuming it was some random house in the neighborhood I had flagged months ago when considering whether to downsize. The photographs loaded slowly. A familiar front porch, a garden I had planted with Evelyn 35 years ago, the bedroom window where she used to watch for my car when I came home late from work. My house, our house, listed for sale at $1.2 million, described in cheerful real estate language as a charming family home with original details and modern updates. My name appeared nowhere in the listing. No mention that the owner still lived there. No indication that anyone had consulted me before putting 40 years of memories on the market for strangers to browse. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. The photographs showed rooms where I had raised my son, where I had held Evelyn's hand as she took her last breath, where I had washed her apple pie dish the night Vanessa asked me how it felt to be useless. Something cold settled in my chest as I looked at them. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter, something patient, the kind of feeling that comes when you realize you have been pushed far enough that retreat is no longer possible. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Harvey Brennan's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice cautious but alert. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "I was wondering when I would hear from you." "I am ready," I told him. "I am ready to activate Clause 7. Harvey Brennan listened without interruption as I explained what I needed. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment before responding. "Clause 7 is serious, Mr. Caldwell," he said. "Once activated, there is no undoing it. Are you certain this is the path you want to take?" I told him I was certain. He promised to begin the paperwork first thing in the morning and reminded me to document everything. Then he wished me good night, and I sat alone in the dark kitchen waiting for something I could not name. It came at 2 a.m. The knock was soft, almost hesitant, as if the person on the other side was not sure they wanted to be heard. I had not been sleeping. I had been sitting in Evelyn's chair by the window watching the street, turning the USB drive over and over in my hands. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there looking like a man who had not slept in days. He was unshaven, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes rimmed with red. He looked 10 years older than 41. The confident professional I had watched retreat from his wife's commands had been replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone carrying a weight so heavy it had bent his spine. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking, "I need to tell you something, before it is too late." I stepped aside and let him in. We sat in the dark kitchen, the only light coming from the street lamp outside the window. Two men surrounded by ghosts, by memories of meals shared at this table when Evelyn was alive and our family still resembled something whole. I did not turn on the lights. Whatever Daniel needed to say, he needed the cover of shadows to say it. He began slowly, his hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee I had poured him. In 2014, he said I was driving home from a client dinner. I had 3 drinks over the course of the evening. Not enough to feel drunk, not enough to think I should not drive, but enough. He paused, staring into the cup as if the answers he needed were floating in the dark liquid. "I ran a red light," he continued. "I didn't see it. I do not know if I was distracted or tired or if the alcohol had affected me more than I realized, but I ran it and I hit another car. A woman was inside. She had a broken collarbone and a concussion. She was conscious when I got out. She was crying, and I panicked. Daniel looked up at me then, and I saw the boy I had raised, the gentle child who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on insects, the teenager who spent hours helping his mother in the garden because he could not bear to see her work alone. I called Vanessa," he said. "She was the first person I thought of. She came immediately. She handled everything. She talked to the woman, offered her money, made arrangements. Within a week, the police report had been buried. The woman had signed an agreement never to speak of it. My insurance never knew. My firm never knew. No one knew except Vanessa and me." He set down the cup, his hands trembling. "She saved my career, Dad. Maybe my freedom. And she has never let me forget it. I sat in silence as the full picture emerged. For 11 years, Vanessa had held that night over Daniel's head. The statute of limitations had long since passed. She could not send him to prison, but she could destroy him in other ways. If the truth came out, he would lose his professional license, his reputation would crumble, clients would abandon him. The life he had built, the success he had achieved, all of it rested on a foundation of silence that Vanessa controlled. Every time I disagree with her, Daniel said, every time I try to stand up for you or push back against something she wants, she says the same thing. Remember 2014? And I collapse. I just collapse. I cannot fight her because she holds the one thing that could end everything. His voice broke on the last word. He buried his face in his hands, and I watched my son fall apart in the kitchen, where he had once sat on his mother's lap and learned to count. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said through his fingers. "I've wanted to protect you. I've wanted to tell her to stop, to stand between you and her cruelty. But I've been so afraid. I watched her tear you apart at that dinner, and I just stood there. Like a coward. Like a worthless coward." The word hung in the air between us. I thought of Vanessa asking me how it felt to be useless. I thought of Daniel standing frozen in the hallway, unable to speak. I thought of Evelyn's letter, her warning that kindness without boundaries was an invitation to be used, and I thought of Gloria's words that something had broken Evelyn's heart when she discovered the truth about our son. This was it. This was the chain that bound him. Not weakness, not cowardice. Fear forged in a moment of terrible judgment and wielded against him for over a decade. I reached across the table and gripped his shoulder. The gesture was firm, deliberate, the way I used to hold him when he was small and frightened of thunderstorms. "You are not a coward," I said. "You are a prisoner. But you do not have to be any more." Daniel looked up at me, confusion and hope warring on his face. "What do you mean?" My expression was calm. Calmer than I had felt in years, calmer than Daniel had seen in longer than he could remember. "I mean, your mother left us both a way out," I said, "and I'm about to use it." I paused, holding his gaze. "But I need to know something first. If it comes to choosing between Vanessa and me, which side will you stand on?" Daniel's answer came without hesitation, his voice steady for the first time all night. "Yours, Dad. I should have chosen yours from the beginning." Daniel stayed until dawn. We talked about things we had avoided for years, about his mother, about the distance that had grown between us, about the life he had imagined for himself before Vanessa's shadow fell across it. When he finally left, the first gray light was creeping through the kitchen windows, and I felt something I had not experienced since Evelyn died. Connection. The sense that I was no longer fighting alone. That morning I drove to Hartford to meet Harvey Brennan in person. His office occupied the third floor of a brick building near the old courthouse, the kind of place where serious matters were handled by serious men. Harvey greeted me with a firm handshake and led me to a conference room where documents were already spread across the table. He had been busy since my call. The Evelyn Caldwell Revocable Trust, he explained, contained provisions most people never knew existed. Evelyn had insisted on them during the drafting process over his initial objections. Clause 7 was the most unusual. It was what she called the protection clause, designed to activate only if I voluntarily requested it, and only under circumstances that suggested I was being exploited or abused. Harvey walked me through the details. Once activated, Clause 7 authorized the trustee to take 3 immediate actions. First, freeze all loans and financial guarantees connected to Daniel's name, effectively cutting off the credit lines Vanessa had been using to fund her various schemes. Second, initiate legal proceedings to reclaim the 40% home equity that had been transferred without my proper consent based on the forged power of attorney Gloria had documented. Third, redirect the remaining assets in the trust to the Evelyn Caldwell Foundation for Elder Advocacy, an organization Evelyn had established quietly 2 years before her death. She planned for this, I said, more to myself than to Harvey. He nodded. She planned for everything, Mr. Caldwell. She came to me 3 years ago with a folder of concerns and a very specific set of instructions. She said she hoped you would never need to use any of it, but she wanted you to have options if you did. I signed the activation papers that afternoon. Harvey promised to file them immediately and warned me that the effects would begin within 48 hours. Small disruptions at first, he said, enough to create confusion without revealing the full scope of what was coming. Evelyn had designed it that way. She wanted to give the other party time to reconsider before the real consequences arrived. The first domino fell the next morning. Gloria called to report what she had observed. Vanessa had received a call from her bank informing her that a loan application she had submitted was being delayed for additional review. Nothing was rejected outright, but the process that should have taken 3 days was now stretching into weeks. That afternoon, a business partner she had been cultivating for months canceled their scheduled meeting without explanation. His assistant cited unexpected conflicts but offered no alternative date. By the second day, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. The real estate agent handling my house called Vanessa to report unexpected complications with the listing. Title issues, he said, though he could not specify what kind. The photography company she had hired to stage the property postponed their visit indefinitely. A contractor who had agreed to make cosmetic repairs before showings suddenly became unavailable. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be traced to a single source. Just friction where there used to be smooth sailing delays, where there used to be instant accommodation. The machinery of Vanessa's carefully constructed life was beginning to grind against invisible resistance. Daniel reported the rest. He told me Vanessa had spent the second evening making phone calls, checking accounts, reviewing every document she could find. Everything looked fine on paper, but nothing was working the way it should. She paced through their house like a caged animal, her voice growing sharper with each dead end. "Something is wrong," she snapped at Daniel. "Someone is interfering with us." He told me he did not rush to reassure her. For the first time in 11 years, he simply sat and watched her spiral, without offering comfort or solutions. She noticed his silence, he said, and it unsettled her more than any of the financial setbacks. On the evening of the second day, Vanessa found an envelope in her mailbox. Daniel described it to me later, his voice hushed with something between fear and awe. There was no return address, no postmark. It had been hand-delivered, placed directly in the box sometime during the afternoon when neither of them was home. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper, the same kind Evelyn had always used for her personal correspondence. Vanessa recognized the handwriting immediately. She had seen it on birthday cards, grocery lists, notes left on the kitchen counter during the years when Evelyn was still alive and still believed her daughter-in-law might become part of the family. The elegant loops and careful spacing were unmistakable. Daniel said Vanessa's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. He said her face went pale, then gray, then something closer to white. He said she read the first line and made a sound he had never heard before, something between a gasp and a moan. The letter began with words Evelyn had written months before her death, preserved and delivered according to a schedule only Gloria knew. "Dear Vanessa," the first line read, "If you are reading this, you have made a terrible mistake. I have been watching you longer than you know." Daniel told me Vanessa looked up from the paper and scanned the empty street outside their window. Her eyes moved from shadow to shadow, searching for something she could not see. Suddenly aware that the dead woman's gaze had never truly closed. Daniel called me an hour after Vanessa opened the envelope. His voice was low, barely above a whisper, as if he feared she might hear him from another room. "She is in the study," he said. "She has been reading the same letter over and over. I have never seen her like this, Dad. She looks terrified." I asked him to tell me everything. He did. Vanessa had stood in the kitchen for a long time after recognizing Evelyn's handwriting, the letter trembling in her hands. Daniel watched from the doorway, unsure whether to approach or retreat. Finally, she moved to the study, closed the door behind her, and did not emerge for nearly an hour. When Daniel pressed his ear to the wood, he heard nothing but silence, punctuated by the occasional sharp intake of breath. He pieced together the contents later after Vanessa left the letter on her desk and retreated to the bedroom. He photographed each page and sent the images to me while I sat in my dark kitchen reading words my wife had written 6 months before she died. The letter was dated and precise, written in Evelyn's measured hand with the same clarity she brought to everything she did. There was no anger in the words, no bitterness, only the calm certainty of someone who had watched and waited and finally decided to speak. "I know what you are, Vanessa," the letter began. "I've known for years. The forged signatures, the manipulated accounts, the way you have isolated Henry from his own son, the way you have turned my boy into your hostage. I watched you do these things while I was still alive. I documented them. I preserved every piece of evidence that crossed my path, and I chose not to stop you." The next paragraph explained why. Evelyn wrote that she had wanted to give Vanessa a chance to change. She had hoped that time and reflection might soften the hard edges of her daughter-in-law's cruelty. She had believed, perhaps foolishly, that somewhere beneath the manipulation there was a woman capable of becoming something better. She had waited and watched and prayed for transformation. You did not take it, the letter continued. You did not change. You became worse. And now I'm gone, and you have mistaken my absence for permission. You have mistaken Henry's kindness for weakness. You have mistaken my silence for ignorance. You are wrong on all counts. The terms came next, laid out with the precision of a legal document. Vanessa had 48 hours from the moment she read the letter. She was to leave the family with whatever she had brought into it and nothing more. She was to file for divorce quietly, without contest, without demands. She was to walk away and never contact Henry or Daniel again. If she complied, Evelyn wrote, the evidence would stay buried. The photographs, the videos, the journals, all of it would remain sealed in Gloria's possession, never to be released. If she did not comply, everything would go to Henry's attorney, her employer, and her family in Ohio. Your mother will learn exactly who her daughter became. Evelyn had written. This is not a threat. It is a consequence. Daniel told me there was something else in the envelope, a small USB drive unlabeled except for a single word written in marker on its surface, sample. Vanessa had plugged it into her laptop with the reluctance of someone diffusing a pommel. Daniel watched through the crack in the study door as images and video clips filled her screen. He saw her face go white as she watched herself forging documents at the kitchen table. He saw her flinch as a video showed her mocking Henry behind his back, imitating his voice while laughing with someone off camera. He saw her freeze completely when footage appeared of her confronting Daniel. Her finger pointed at his chest, her mouth forming words that Daniel knew by heart. Remember 2014? Just samples, just fragments, but enough to prove that the full archive existed, that every cruel word and dishonest act had been captured and preserved by eyes she had never suspected were watching. Daniel said Vanessa sat motionless for a long time after the final clip ended. Then she checked the timestamp on the letter's instructions and looked at the clock on her laptop. The 48 hours had started the moment she opened the envelope. By Daniel's count, nearly 2 hours had already passed. For the first time in her adult life, Daniel told me his wife was not in control. A dead woman had outmaneuvered her from beyond the grave. Every scheme, every manipulation, every cruelty she had inflicted, thinking no one was watching, had been documented, archived, and held in reserve for exactly this moment. The system she had built to control others had been surrounded by a larger system designed to contain her. Daniel said Vanessa reached for her phone, her finger hovering over his name in her contacts. Then she stopped. He watched, understanding dawn on her face, the realization that if she called him, she would be calling someone who might already know. Someone who might already be working with Henry, someone who had heard her mention 2014 for the last time. She set the phone down slowly and looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. Daniel recognized the expression. It was the look of a woman who had suddenly discovered that she was surrounded by enemies, some living and some dead, and who had no idea anymore who she could trust. The clock on her phone changed as she stared at it. 47 hours, 58 minutes, and 32 seconds remaining. Daniel told me she did not sleep that night. Neither did I. The next 48 hours unfolded like a siege, and I watched from a distance as the walls closed in around Vanessa one by one. Gloria kept me informed during the first 12 hours. Vanessa moved through the early stages of denial with the frantic energy of someone who still believed she could outrun what was coming. She called Gloria's old phone number, the one that had been disconnected 3 years ago when Evelyn staged her departure. She drove to the post office, listed on the envelope's return address, and demanded information about the box rental. The clerk told her it was registered to the E. Caldwell estate and had been paid 5 years in advance. No other information was available. Daniel reported that Vanessa came to my house while I was meeting with Harvey. She let herself in with a key I did not know she possessed and searched through drawers, closets, filing cabinets. She found nothing because there was nothing to find. Everything that mattered was with Gloria, stored in an apartment Vanessa did not know existed, protected by a woman she had dismissed as insignificant years ago. Every door Vanessa opened led to another wall. Every thread she pulled unraveled into nothing. By the 13th hour, the external collapse began. Her employer called first. Daniel was in the room when her phone rang, and he watched her face shift from confusion to alarm as the voice on the other end spoke. The company had received documentation, the caller explained, concerning irregularities in her expense reports. Receipts that did not match submitted claims. Reimbursements for trips that company records showed she never took. They needed her to come in for a meeting to discuss the findings. Vanessa hung up and stood motionless for nearly a minute. Daniel said she looked like someone who had just been told the ground beneath her feet was no longer solid. The mortgage company called next. The loan application she had submitted weeks ago, the one that would have financed Daniel's business expansion, using my house as collateral, had been flagged for irregularities. The representative used careful language, but made clear that approval was no longer likely. Additional documentation would be required. A formal review had been initiated. By hour 20, the client she had been cultivating for months sent a brief email. After careful consideration, it read, "We have decided to go in a different direction. No explanation, no opportunity for discussion, just a door closing quietly in her face." Daniel called me during hour 25, his voice hushed. "She is starting to break," he said. "She keeps checking her phone. I think she's going to call you." He was right. The first call came at hour 26. I let it ring through to voicemail. Her voice was sharp, demanding the tone of someone accustomed to control. "What did you do, Henry? Whatever this is, you need to call it off right now. I am not going to be bullied by a dead woman and a senile old man who does not know when to quit." I deleted the message without responding. The second call came 4 hours later. Her tone had shifted, the aggression replaced by something meant to sound reasonable. "Henry, let us talk about this like adults. I'm sure we can work something out. Whatever Evelyn thought she knew, I can explain. Just call me back and we can discuss this calmly." I did not call back. The third call came near hour 36. The negotiating mask had crumbled entirely. Her voice cracked as she spoke the words, tumbling out in a rush. "Henry, please. I'm sorry. I know I have not always been kind to you. I know I have made mistakes. Whatever you want, I will do it. Just please call me back. Please." Silence was my only answer. I spent those hours preparing. I cleaned the house, arranged chairs in the living room, reviewed the documentation Gloria had provided one final time. I thought about what I would say when the moment came, how I would present the choice Evelyn had designed for exactly this confrontation. I thought about my son, about the chain that had bound him for 11 years, about the freedom that was finally within reach. At hour 47, I picked up my phone and dialed Vanessa's number. She answered before the first ring finished. "Henry." Her voice was raw, exhausted, stripped of every pretense. "Come to my house," I said. "Alone. We need to talk." The line went silent for a moment. Then quietly, "I will be there in 20 minutes. I ended the call and sat down in Evelyn's chair to wait. Daniel told me later what happened after I hung up. Vanessa grabbed her keys from the counter, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, her face hollow from 2 days without sleep. He stood from the couch where he had been watching her pace. "I'm coming with you," he said. She shook her head. He said, "Alone." Daniel's expression hardened in a way she had never seen before. His voice was steady, his posture straight, his eyes meeting hers without flinching. "I will be there anyway," he said. "You do not get to face him without me." Not this time. He was not asking permission. He was not offering a suggestion. He was stating a fact, the first fact he had stated to her in 11 years, without checking to see if she approved. Daniel told me Vanessa looked at him for a long moment and something shifted in her face. Recognition, perhaps. Or the beginning of understanding. She realized he said that she had already lost him. The chain she had used to bind him for over a decade had finally snapped and he was no longer hers to command. They drove separately to my house. When the headlights appeared in my driveway, I stood and walked to the door. The confrontation I had waited 2 years for was about to begin. Daniel's car pulled into the driveway 10 minutes before Vanessa's headlights appeared on the street. I watched from the kitchen window as he parked, and something caught my attention. He had pulled all the way in his front bumper, nearly touching the garage door, his car positioned as if he intended to stay. For years he had parked on the street with his vehicle facing outward, ready for escape. Tonight he had driven in without hesitation, claiming space he had avoided since the accident that had haunted him for over a decade. I opened the back door before he could knock. He looked tired but steady, his shoulders straighter than I had seen them in years. The hunted expression that usually shadowed his features had been replaced by something calmer, something that resembled resolve. "She is coming," he said. "I know," I replied. "Are you ready?" His answer came slowly, as if he were discovering the truth of it even as he spoke. "I have been ready for years. I just did not know it." I poured him a cup of coffee and we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had confessed the accident 2 nights before, the same table where his mother and I had shared 40 years of breakfasts and quiet conversations. The weight of history pressed down around us. But for the first time, it felt like foundation rather than burden. Daniel reached into his jacket and withdrew a USB drive smaller than the one Gloria had given me, but similar in appearance. He set it on the table between us and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I have never told anyone." He explained that 5 years ago, around the same time his mother first got sick, he had begun keeping records of his own. Screenshots of financial transactions Vanessa made without his consent. Photographs of documents she signed using authority she did not have. A journal of incidents, dates, and conversations that troubled him. He had stored everything on this drive hidden in a safety deposit box Vanessa did not know existed. "I thought I was alone," he said. "I thought if I ever needed to escape, I would need proof that I was not complicit in everything she did. I did not know Mom had set up something bigger. I did not know you had Gloria. I did not know anyone else was watching." I took the drive from the table and held it in my palm. The weight was negligible, but what it represented was immense. My son had been fighting back in the only way he knew how, building his own small fortress against the woman who controlled him. Preparing for a day he was not sure would ever come. "You were never alone," I said. "Your mother made sure of that. She was protecting both of us even when we could not see it." Daniel's eyes glistened and he looked away toward the window where the first hint of Vanessa's headlights was beginning to glow in the distance. I studied him in that moment, really looked at him for the first time in years. I saw the boy who used to fall asleep in my lap during long car rides, his small body warm and trusting against my chest. I saw the teenager who came to me with clumsy questions about girls, embarrassed but knowing I would not laugh. I saw the young man who had stood beside me at his mother's funeral, his hand gripping mine so tightly I thought my bones might crack. And I saw the man who had gotten lost somewhere along the way, who had made a terrible mistake one night 11 years ago and had been paying for it ever since, not to the law, not to the woman he had injured, but to the wife who had turned his guilt into a leash and his shame into a cage. "Daniel," I said, and waited until he looked at me. "What happened in 2014 was a mistake, a terrible one. You hurt someone, and you ran from the consequences instead of facing them. That was wrong, but it does not define you. What defines you is what you do next." His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment he was not 41 years old anymore. He was a small boy who had broken something precious and was waiting to see if his father would still love him. "I want to do better, Dad," he said, his voice cracking. "I want to be the son Mom believed I could be." I reached across the table and gripped his hand the way I used to when he was young and frightened. "Then be him," I said, "starting tonight." The doorbell rang, cutting through the moment like a blade. We both stood, and I saw Daniel's spine straighten, saw his jaw set with determination. For the first time in over a decade, we were on the same side. Father and son united against the force that had divided us for so long. I put my hand on his shoulder before we walked to the door. "Whatever happens in there," I said, "remember something important. We are not trying to destroy her. We are trying to set everyone free, including her." Daniel nodded, and together we walked to the front of the house. I opened the door. Vanessa stood on the porch, smaller than I had ever seen her. The armor of confidence she had worn like a second skin had been stripped away by 48 hours of collapse. Her hair was uncombed, her clothes were wrinkled, her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, darting past me into the house as if searching for something to hold on to. Then she saw Daniel. He stood behind me, not beside her. His position spoke louder than any words could have. He was with his father now. The ally she had controlled for 11 years, the hostage she had kept through fear and shame, had finally switched sides. She looked from him to me and back again, and I watched the last flicker of hope die in her eyes. She was utterly and completely alone. "Come in," I said quietly. "We have a lot to discuss." Vanessa stepped into the house like a woman entering a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Her eyes moved from surface to surface, cataloging exits, measuring distances, calculating odds that no longer existed. I led her to the living room where I had arranged 3 chairs in a triangle, each one facing the others. No one would have their back to anyone else. No one could hide. I gestured for her to sit. She did, perching on the edge of the cushion as if ready to flee at any moment. Daniel took the chair across from her, his posture straight, his hands resting on his knees. I remained standing for a moment, gathering the materials I had prepared. Then I began. I did not yell. I did not accuse. I simply showed her everything, laying it out on the coffee table like an engineer presenting blueprints for a structure that had already been built. Gloria's photographs came first, images of forged signatures and manipulated documents arranged in chronological order. Then, Daniel's USB drive, its contents displayed on my laptop screen recordings and screenshots that corroborated everything Gloria had gathered. Then the legal papers from Harvey Brennan, the trust provisions, the protection clause, the machinery Evelyn had constructed to reclaim what had been stolen. Finally, the letters. Evelyn's words preserved and delivered according to a timeline only the dead woman had known. "This is what we have," I said when the presentation was complete. "This is what we can do with it, but that is not why I called you here." Vanessa's first response was defiance. She denied knowledge of the forged documents, claimed the photographs had been manipulated, suggested that Gloria was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. When denial failed, she deflected. She blamed Daniel for not managing their finances properly. She blamed me for being too old to understand modern family dynamics. She blamed Evelyn for meddling in affairs that were none of her business. When deflection failed, she threatened. She would hire lawyers. She would countersue. She would make sure everyone knew that Henry Caldwell was a paranoid old man being manipulated by a dead woman's delusions. But the threats rang hollow, and we all knew it. The foundations of her power had been systematically removed. The loans were frozen. The house sale was blocked. Her employer was investigating irregularities. Her client base was evaporating. She had nothing left to threaten, with no leverage remaining, no cards left to play. When she finally fell silent, something unexpected happened. She didn't beg. She did not plead for mercy or promise to change. Instead, she started to talk. "You want to know why I'm like this?" she said. Her voice was hollow, stripped of its usual sharp edges, as empty as a house after the furniture has been removed. I waited. "My father was like you, Henry," she continued. "Kind, patient, forgave everything. He worked 2 jobs his whole life to provide for us. He never complained. He never demanded anything for himself. He gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left." She looked up, her eyes dry but devastated. "My mother used him up like a paper towel and threw him away. She spent his savings on things she wanted. She ran up debts in his name. She told him she loved him while she drained every account he had. When the money was gone, she left. He died in a nursing home with $7 in his bank account. My mother bought a condo in Florida with his retirement fund. I was 15 years old." The room was silent. Daniel stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time, not as a monster, but as a wounded creature lashing out at a world that had taught her cruelty before she was old enough to choose something different. "I swore I would never be him," Vanessa said. "I would never be weak. I would never be the one who got used and thrown away. I would always be the one in control. Always be the one holding the cards. Always be the one who could not be hurt." She paused, her breath catching. "I did not want to hurt you, Henry. I just could not stop being afraid. Every time I saw your kindness, I saw my father. And every time I saw my father, I saw how he ended up. Alone, broke, forgotten. I could not let that happen to me. I could not let anyone have that power over me." I thought of Evelyn's letter, the words she had written about kindness without boundaries. I thought of something else she used to say during our long conversations about people and their choices. Hurt people, she would tell me. The cycle continues until someone is brave enough to break it." I stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the garden Evelyn had planted years ago was dormant in the November cold, but I could see the shapes of bushes she had chosen, the outline of beds she had designed. She had always believed in things that could grow in potential, that could be nurtured in the possibility of transformation. When I spoke, my voice was gentle. Not with the gentleness of weakness, but with the kind of strength that does not need to prove itself through volume or force. "I'm not going to destroy you, Vanessa," I said. "That is not what Evelyn wanted, and it is not what I want. Your mother taught you that the world is divided into users and used, and you chose to be a user because you were terrified of the alternative. But there is another option. One your mother never showed you, one you never believed existed." I turned to face her. "I'm going to offer you something you have never been offered before. A chance to become someone different, a chance to break the cycle your mother started. The question is, are you brave enough to take it?" Vanessa stared at me as if I had spoken in a language she did not understand. The question hung between us, and I could see her mind working behind her exhausted eyes, searching for the trap, the hidden condition, the cruelty disguised as mercy. She had spent her entire adult life assuming that kindness was a weapon wielded by people who wanted something. She could not comprehend an offer that did not come with chains attached. "What are you saying?" she asked. I moved away from the window and stood where she could see my face clearly, where there would be no shadows to hide behind, no ambiguity in my expression. "I could send this evidence everywhere," I said. "Your employer, the Bar Association, your family in Ohio. I could make sure you never recover from what you have done. I have the documentation. I have the legal standing. I have every right to destroy you, and no one would blame me for doing it." I paused, letting the words settle. "But Evelyn did not build this system for revenge," I continued. "She built it for protection, and she built it for the chance that people can change. She watched you for 5 years, Vanessa. She documented everything, but she also waited. She gave you time to become different on your own. You did not take that chance. Now I'm giving you another one." Vanessa's confusion deepened. She looked at Daniel as if he might translate, but he sat motionless, watching me with an expression I could not read. I explained the terms. The Evelyn Caldwell Foundation for Elder Advocacy had been established 2 years before my wife died. It served elderly people who had been abandoned by their families, exploited by caregivers, or left to navigate systems designed to confuse them. It provided legal assistance, social support, and simple human presence to people who had been forgotten by the ones they trusted most. "You will work there for 2 years, I said, full-time, unpaid. You will sit with people who have been treated the way you treated me. You will hear their stories. You will see yourself reflected in the eyes of the children who abandoned them. You will learn what your cruelty looks like from the other side." Vanessa's face had gone pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "If you complete 2 years, the evidence stays sealed. Everything Gloria gathered, everything Daniel documented, everything Harvey has prepared, none of it goes public. You will have the chance to rebuild whatever life you choose, free from the shadow of what you have done. But if you leave early, if you quit, if you fail to fulfill your commitment, everything goes public immediately. Your employer, the bar, your mother, everyone will know exactly who you became." The room was silent. Daniel shifted in his chair, his eyes moving between his wife and me. "What about Daniel?" Vanessa asked. Her voice was small, uncertain, nothing like the commanding tone she had used at Sunday dinners. I looked at my son. He met my gaze and nodded slightly, giving me permission to speak for both of us. "That is between you two," I said. "If after 2 years you both want to rebuild your marriage with honesty, this time with truth as the foundation, instead of fear, I will not stand in your way. If you decide you want a divorce, I will not stop that either. Whatever you choose, it will be a real choice made by 2 people who are finally free to make it." I turned back to Vanessa. "But the blackmail ends tonight. Daniel's mistake from 2014 stays in the past. You hold nothing over him anymore. That chain is broken. Whatever happens between you now happens because you both choose it, not because one of you is trapped." Vanessa sat motionless for a long time. I could see the calculations running behind her eyes. The old instincts searching for angles, advantages, ways to turn this offer into something she could control. But there were no angles left. The only path forward was the one I had offered. Finally she spoke. "Why?" she asked. Her voice cracked on the word. "Why would you do this instead of just ending me? You have every reason to hate me. You have every right to destroy me. Why would you offer me anything except punishment?" I thought of Evelyn. I thought of her patience, her faith in people, her stubborn belief that transformation was always possible if someone was brave enough to try. I thought of the letters she had written, the system she had built, the years of preparation that had led to this moment. She had not done any of it for revenge. She had done it because she believed in something I had almost forgotten. "Because my wife believed that nobody is born cruel," I said. "They just forget how to be kind. She watched you for 5 years, Vanessa. She saw what you did to me, to Daniel, to everyone around you. But she also believed you were not beyond redemption. She wanted to give you a chance to remember who you could have been. I'm honoring her wish." Vanessa's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. She stood slowly, her movements uncertain, like a person learning to walk after a long illness. She walked to the door and stopped with her hand on the knob. She didn't turn around. "I will do it," she said quietly, "not because I believe I can change, but because no one has ever given me a chance to try." She opened the door and stepped out into the night. I watched her walk to her car, her steps slow but steady. For the first time since I had known her, she was not running from something. She was walking toward it. Daniel told me what happened on Vanessa's first day at Shady Oaks Senior Center. He had driven her there himself, not because she asked, but because he wanted to see her walk through the doors. He said she looked like a woman approaching a prison sentence, her shoulders rigid, her jaw tight, her eyes scanning the building as if measuring the dimensions of her cell. The foundation director met her in the lobby and explained the assignment. Vanessa would be working in the memory care unit, the wing reserved for residents with dementia and Alzheimer's, the loneliest people in the facility. Their families visited rarely, if at all. Some had been abandoned, completely left in the care of strangers who changed shifts every 8 hours while the people who should have loved them moved on with their lives. Daniel said Vanessa's face went pale when she heard the assignment. She had expected paperwork, administrative tasks, something that would keep her at a distance from the residents themselves. Instead, she was being sent directly into the heart of human suffering, face to face with people who had been discarded by the ones they trusted most. She spent the first hours checking her watch. Daniel learned this from a volunteer coordinator who reported to the foundation. Vanessa moved through the unit with visible discomfort, answering questions when asked but initiating nothing, keeping her eyes down, counting the minutes until her shift would end. She was serving time, not seeking transformation. She was enduring, not engaging. Then Margaret called her over. Margaret was 82 years old, a former schoolteacher who had spent 40 years educating children in a small Ohio town. Her memory was failing now, slipping away in pieces like sand through fingers. But on that particular afternoon, she was lucid. She sat in a wheelchair by the window, watching the parking lot as if expecting someone who would never come. She asked Vanessa to sit with her. Vanessa hesitated, then complied. Margaret wanted someone to listen. She told Vanessa about her daughter, about the years of sacrifice and love she had poured into raising her, about the promises made and broken, about the day her daughter had emptied her bank accounts and sold her house and put her in this place and never come back. Her voice was thin as paper, fragile as old lace, but the words were clear. I gave her everything, Margaret said. I thought that was what love meant. I thought if I sacrificed enough, she would love me back. I was wrong. Love should go both ways. It should not leave you empty. It should not leave you here. Daniel said, Vanessa could not meet the old woman's eyes. She sat rigid in her chair, her hands clenched in her lap, her face a mask that was beginning to crack. When Margaret finished speaking, Vanessa mumbled something about needing to check on other residents and fled the room. She made it to her car before she broke down. Daniel was waiting in the parking lot when she emerged. He watched her walk past him without acknowledgement, watched her unlock her car and climb inside and sit motionless behind the wheel. Then her shoulders began to shake. He told me he had never seen his wife cry like that, not in 11 years of marriage. The sobs came from somewhere deep, somewhere she had locked away so long ago she had forgotten it existed. He did not approach her. He understood that some things must be faced alone. That night alone in her apartment, Vanessa sat with Margaret's words echoing in her mind. I gave her everything. That was what Henry had given his family. That was what her father had given her mother. Kindness without expectation, love without boundaries, trust without conditions. And in both cases, the people they loved had taken everything and left them with nothing. She had sworn never to be like her father. She had built her entire life around the determination to be the one who took rather than the one who gave. But sitting in that nursing home, looking into Margaret's clouded eyes, she had finally seen the truth she had been running from for 30 years. She had not avoided becoming her father. She had become her mother. The realization was devastating and undeniable. Every cruel word she had spoken to Henry, every manipulation she had used against Daniel, every piece of their lives she had taken and claimed as her own. She had done to them exactly what her mother had done to her father. She had become the monster she had feared. At midnight, she picked up her phone and dialed a number she had not called in 15 years. Her mother answered on the 4th ring, her voice annoyed at the late hour, demanding to know who was calling. Mom, Vanessa said. Her voice cracked on the word. I need to tell you something. I need to tell you what I have become. And I need you to tell me if it is too late to be someone else. Silence stretched across the line, across the years of distance and denial. Then, for the first time in decades, her mother began to cry. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Daniel told me later that Vanessa had shared pieces of it with him, fragments of a lifetime of pain finally being spoken aloud. By the end, she understood things she had spent her whole life running from, the cycle her mother had started, the fear that had driven every choice, the walls she had built that had become her own prison. When she hung up, she sat in her car until sunrise, watching the sky turn from black to gray to gold. She thought of Henry's offer, of Evelyn's letters, of Margaret's empty eyes. She thought of all the people she had hurt and all the years she had wasted, and she made a decision. She would not just serve her 2 years, she would earn them. A year passed, and the world I had known continued to transform in ways I had not dared to imagine. The foundation director called me one afternoon, 12 months after Vanessa had begun her work at Shady Oaks. Her name was Patricia, a woman in her 60s who had spent 3 decades serving the forgotten elderly of our community. She had been skeptical when I first explained the arrangement, doubtful that someone like Vanessa could genuinely change. But her voice on the phone that day carried something I had not expected: admiration. I did not believe it at first, Patricia told me. I thought she would quit within a month. I thought she was going through the motions, serving her sentence, waiting for the clock to run out. But Mr. Caldwell, I was wrong. She knows every resident by name. She remembers their stories, their families, their favorite songs. She advocates for their care in ways that make my job easier. The residents trust her. That does not happen unless it is real. I drove to Shady Oaks that afternoon and watched from a distance. Vanessa sat in the memory care unit with an elderly man named Walter, a retired mechanic who had lost his wife the previous month. She was reading to him from a book of poetry, her voice gentle in a way I had never heard before. Patient. Kind. When Walter interrupted to share a memory of his late wife, Vanessa closed the book and listened. She held his hand while he cried. She did not check her watch or look toward the door. She was simply present, fully and completely, in a way the old Vanessa would have considered weakness. I left without letting her know I had been there. Some transformations are too fragile to observe directly. Daniel and I had rebuilt our relationship in the months since the confrontation. We fished together at the lake where I had taught him to cast a line 40 years ago, the same water where Evelyn and I had spent countless summer afternoons watching our son grow into a young man. We talked about things we had avoided for years, about his mother, about regrets, about second chances. He had started therapy 3 months after that night in my living room. For the first time in 11 years, he was processing the guilt he had carried since 2014, speaking the truth to someone trained to help him bear its weight. The change in him was gradual, but unmistakable. His shoulders had straightened, his eyes met mine without flinching. The haunted look that had shadowed his features for so long had begun to fade. "I am not who I was, Dad," he told me one afternoon as we sat on the dock with our lines in the water. "I spent so many years being afraid. Afraid of Vanessa. Afraid of the truth. Afraid of what you would think of me if you knew. But I'm finally becoming who I should have been. I'm finally becoming the son Mom believed I could be." I did not have words for what I felt in that moment. I simply put my hand on his shoulder and let the silence speak for both of us. Vanessa flew to Ohio in the spring. Daniel told me about the trip afterward, his voice careful as he shared details that were not entirely his to give. She had not been back in 18 years. She had not spoken to her mother in person since the phone call that first night. But something had shifted in her, some wall had finally crumbled, and she needed to see where she had come from in order to understand where she was going. She met her mother in the small apartment where the older woman now lived alone. They talked for hours, the stories Vanessa had blocked out finally being spoken aloud. The damage was real. The pain was real. But so was the possibility of something different. She visited her father's grave for the first time. She stood before the simple headstone and did not ask for forgiveness. She asked for the chance to be different. Her mother, older now and full of her own regrets, took her hand and said the words Vanessa had needed to hear her entire life. "It is not too late. It is never too late." I visited Evelyn's grave on a quiet afternoon in late summer. I brought fresh flowers, the white lilies she had always loved, and I sat on the bench beside her headstone and told her everything. About Gloria's faithful work, about Daniel's redemption, about Vanessa's slow and painful transformation. I told her about the foundation bearing her name, about the people it was helping, about the legacy she had built without ever knowing how far it would reach. "You were right," I said to the silent stone. "Kindness without boundaries is dangerous. It invites people to use you. It teaches them that your generosity has no limits and therefore no value. But kindness with boundaries, kindness that demands change, kindness that offers redemption, Only to those willing to earn it that is something else entirely. That is what you taught me, that is what you gave me, and I will carry it with me for the rest of my life. A breeze moved through the trees above me, rustling the leaves in a pattern that sounded almost like laughter. I closed my eyes and let myself believe just for a moment that she could hear me. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. I picked it up and read the words on the screen. Dad, Vanessa and I want to invite you to dinner. She is cooking. Mom's recipe for pot roast. She found the card in the old recipe box. I stared at the message for a long time. Evelyn's pot roast, the dish she had made every Sunday for 40 years, the recipe she had perfected through decades of patient adjustment, the meal that had meant family belonging home. I typed back slowly, my fingers unsteady on the keys. I will be there. I drove to Daniel's house on a Sunday evening in late November, almost exactly 2 years after the dinner that had started everything. The same street, the same driveway, the same front door with the crystal chandelier glowing behind the frosted glass. But as I walked up the path, I knew that everything waiting inside had changed. Vanessa opened the door before I could ring the bell. She stood there for a moment, uncertain, her hands clasped in front of her like a woman who had not yet learned how to greet someone she had once tried to destroy. Then she stepped forward and embraced me. The hug was tentative, unpracticed, the gesture of someone relearning a language she had forgotten long ago. But it was genuine. I felt that in the way her arms tightened briefly before letting go. Henry, she said, thank you for coming. Daniel appeared behind her and took my coat. He hung it in the closet with a smile that reached his eyes, the kind of smile I had not seen on his face in over a decade. The hallway looked different now. The artificial flowers had been replaced with a simple vase of fresh daisies. The crystal chandelier still hung above us, but its cold light seemed softer, somehow warmed by something I could not name. The dining room table was set simply without pretense. No elaborate centerpieces, no polished silver arranged in precise formations, just plates and glasses and napkins folded with care. In the center sat the pot roast, steam rising from the dish filling the room with an aroma that stopped me in my tracks. It smelled exactly like Evelyn's. I took my seat at the table, the same chair I had occupied 2 years ago when Vanessa had asked me how it felt to be useless. Daniel sat across from me, and Vanessa took the place at the head of the table. She served the meal herself, portioning the meat and vegetables onto our plates with quiet attention. Conversation flowed naturally in a way it never had before. We talked about the foundation, about the residents Vanessa had grown to care for, about the programs she was helping to develop. We talked about Daniel's new job at a smaller firm where the hours were reasonable and the work was meaningful. We talked about the spring garden I was planting, the tomatoes and peppers I intended to grow in the beds Evelyn had designed decades ago. Vanessa listened more than she spoke. When she did talk, she asked questions instead of making pronouncements. She wanted to know about my plans for the garden. She asked Daniel about his therapy sessions with genuine interest rather than judgment. At one point during the meal, Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. She let him, their fingers intertwined with the ease of two people who had finally learned how to be gentle with each other. I watched her throughout the evening, searching for traces of the woman who had tormented me. The sharp edges were gone. The defensive posture had softened. The fear that had driven every cruel word and calculated manipulation had been replaced by something else. Not confidence exactly. Something quieter. Something that looked like peace. After dinner, Vanessa asked if she could speak with me alone. Daniel nodded and began clearing the table while she led me to the kitchen. We stood at the sink together, washing dishes, a task that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. The water ran warm over our hands as we worked in companionable silence. Then she spoke. "I need to ask you something," she said. Her voice was soft, uncertain. Did Evelyn really believe I could change, or was this all just a very elaborate punishment, a way to make me suffer for what I did to you? I turned off the water and dried a dish slowly, considering my answer. The question deserved honesty, not comfort. Evelyn used to say something I told her. She said that nobody is born to be the villain. They just forget they had a choice. She watched you for 5 years, Vanessa. She saw everything you did. But she also saw something else. She saw a woman who was terrified, who had built walls so high she could not see over them anymore, who had forgotten that there was another way to live. She did not want to punish you. She wanted to remind you that you had a choice. She wanted to give you the chance to make a different one. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly, her eyes glistening but her voice steady. "I'm glad she did," she said, "even if I did not deserve it." We finished the dishes in silence. When the last plate was put away, she thanked me again for coming. I hugged her back this time, and the gesture felt less foreign than it had at the door. I said goodnight to Daniel and walked to my car. Before starting the engine, I sat for a moment and looked back at the house. Through the window, I could see Daniel and Vanessa cleaning up together, their silhouettes moving through the warm light. He said something and she laughed softly. The sound carried faintly through the glass, and I realized I had never heard her laugh like that before. Without edge. Without calculation. Just joy. I reached into my wallet and took out the business card Evelyn had left me. The paper was worn soft at the edges, now creased from months of being carried close. I didn't need it anymore. I tucked it into the glove compartment and started the engine. Snow began to fall as I drove home. The first snow of winter, clean and quiet, covering the old year's wounds with something new. At a red light, I stopped and looked up at the sky, watching the flakes drift down through the glow of the street lamps. I remembered Evelyn's voice from long ago, a conversation we had shared in our kitchen after a difficult day. She had taken my hand and said something I had carried with me ever since. "Henry, the best revenge is not destruction. It is outliving your enemies by becoming someone they could never imagine." I smiled. For the first time in years, it reached my eyes. The light turned green, and I drove forward into a life I had almost forgotten was possible. A life rebuilt not on revenge, but on the stubborn, patient architecture of grace. And so Henry Caldwell's story comes to an end, not with the destruction of his enemies, but with the restoration of his family. A wife who loved him enough to build a fortress from beyond the grave. A son who found the courage to break free from 11 years of fear. A daughter-in-law who discovered that it is never too late to become someone different. And a quiet man who learned that true strength is not measured by how hard you can strike, but by how much grace you can offer when you have every right to strike instead. This story reminds us that the people who hurt us are often carrying wounds we cannot see. It teaches us that kindness without boundaries invites destruction, but kindness with boundaries can rebuild what seemed forever broken. And it shows us that the best revenge is not watching our enemies fall. It is rising so high that the person we become is unrecognizable to the person who once tried to tear us down. If Henry's journey touched your heart, if you found yourself cheering for his quiet dignity and his refusal to let cruelty define him, I hope you will share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me what moment affected you the most. Was it Evelyn's letters from beyond the grave, Daniel's midnight confession, Vanessa's transformation at the nursing home? Your thoughts and your stories matter to me. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another tale of resilience, redemption, and the stubborn architecture of grace. Thank you for listening until the very end.
Did you enjoy my story? What a journey it has been. I truly wonder, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have chosen silence to keep the peace, or would you have done what I did to reclaim your dignity? Let's meet in the comments below. I'm so curious to hear your thoughts. I'm reading every single one. Which city are you listening from tonight? If my story resonated with you, you can support me and help me bring more stories like this to the world by sending a super thanks. Your sweet support means the world to me and allows me to continue this journey with all of you. On the screen now, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend you watch next. There are so many more on my channel, each with its own lessons and triumphs. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you for being here with me. Until the next story, with love and respect.